Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of In the Odds of Truth. With us for the first time is Dirk Pohlmann. He's a German journalist, author, screenwriter, director, and producer of 20 historical documentaries for German public media, Arte, R&D, and ZDF. And we're going to be talking today about the best things to talk about, the conspiracies, except they're not conspiracies, how the U.S. controls its vassals, amongst other things. And we've talked about this with Colonel Towner. If we can begin, you know, just on a top level, a little bit of the conspiracy that nobody wants to talk about. You know,
Hello, dear friends. Just want to remind you, if you like this video, you like what you hear, click like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Send it to your friends. Let's grow this channel. Maybe we can finally hit it up to 100,000. That'd be a good round number for the summer. So let me know, leave some comments, and give a thumbs up. So look forward to seeing you in the next video. Cheers.
when I was a cadet, I had an assignment to cover fire bombings, write a paper on fire bombings, which I didn't know anything about. I didn't ask for that assignment. I was given that assignment. Dutifully, I went to NC State's giant library, which is about 9 stories high, pulled out a lot of books, and wrote a paper about how, everybody remembers Dresden, but the U.S. military and the British had firebombed every single German city, and just how they did it, and that they controlled fires in closed walled cities to work out the formula and so on. I got a 3 or a C on that assignment, not because it was badly written, but because the major who read it, who's our military professor, didn't agree with that. The U.S. military is committing a war crime, so he gave me
Mhm.
a 3. And then when I was in Germany, when I was put in as assistant S4, so transportation officer, even though I was an armor officer, I was put in that slot eventually. I We had our headquarters in Würzburg, and when I go there, we had a woman there who was working for the U.S. military, and she was 6 years old in 1944. And she said they were watching from Würzburg, they were watching Schweinfurt burn, which is 45 kilometers to the north of Würzburg. You could see the flame coming up. And then she was talking about how Würzburg was burnt 2 weeks later. And she was saying that when they'd see Soviet planes coming in, they never ran for their lives because they knew they were.
Okay.
Yeah, it does that one. So, and,
Yeah.
uh, and
What I understood is you had a lot of was missing, but I
yes,
understood you talked to a woman from Germany who was 6 years old,
yes,
and she probably witnessed something, and she was not afraid of the Soviets because they
right,
didn't
right.
bomb. Yeah.
Yeah, they said that
Okay.
yes, they
Yeah.
were going to go bomb the factories, they were going to go bomb a Wehrmacht unit. But when she said they saw American or British planes, they ran for their lives because they would strafe civilians to kill civilians. So
Yes.
again, this is not something that this is one of the first things that kind of started opening my eyes up to there's a lot more to this than what you see in the books. Because everybody talks about Dresden, but nobody talks about everything else. And then that just gets overlaid in history going forward. Um, how much is even talked about this in Germany, let alone in the West?
Yes, it is. I did a documentary which was called Heimatfront. That is about Germany in Second World War, the attitude of the civilians, and I was interested in the exactly this topic that you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
because my mother survived the Hamburg raid, and that was the last thing she remembered before she died. She died from Alzheimer. Everything was gone, but the raid on Hamburg was still in her mind. It was burned in.
Wow.
My mother-in-law, she said her biggest wish as a child, she was a child in World War II, was to sleep for one night through because they always had to run for the bunkers. They were waking up, and then there was this fear of death every night. Yeah, so that was ingrained. My mother ran for her life as a young, very young woman through Hamburg, And she was talking about that. That really, of course, it traumatized everybody who survived that. And then I talked to the guy who was the fire chief in Hamburg at that time, and he was interested because Firestorm was something new. He filmed it with a camera
Hmm.
in color film because
Wow.
he'd never seen something like that before. So, and I had trouble in this documentary because I had said this can't be legal because 80% of the German cities were destroyed.
Hmm.
If you look at that, they look like ruins. And then, of course, you can say for the British, for example, they had no other way to fight Germany than bombing. So that is an argument, yeah. My father told me that the Americans were more accurate in bombing. They did daylight flights. The British were coming at night, and they were simply destroying. You cannot hit anything at that time with a bomber plane. Exactly. So this is in Germany. It's a very sensitive topic. If you talk about it, you get into trouble. For example, if you talk about Dresden, you have to say that it's about the official estimate is about 20,000 people died. That can be doubted. Yeah.
Wow.
If you go to Hamburg, it's 40,000 in 3 days. And Dresden was the city was full of refugees. So that is, but the whole thing is very touchy. So it is the official line, and that line is rehearsed in the TV stations as well. Is we talk about that Germany started the war. You don't put yourself into the role of a victim, which is also understandable. But it's long enough ago, I think, and for the generations now, there are so many things we need to know. I just give you another example. I had been in Belarus 4 years ago, first time, and I didn't know. I thought I was arrogant enough to think that nobody could tell me anything about World War II and large scale issues that I didn't know. And I didn't know that 33% of the Belarusian population were killed by German soldiers.
Yep.
So we know a ton about the Holocaust, but the 27 million dead Russians, half of them civilians, and that was mainly Ukraine and Belarus. They was devastated and by forms of brutality that are unimaginable, even for today, like using children as blood
Yep.
draining the blood from things like that. The whole thing is it needs to be addressed in a way from an overlook, and that is not to distribute and say the Germans were not that bad and the Americans are that bad either. That is not the attitude that we should have, but it should be to understand what's going on, and even today, for example, to make a jump there, the hatred of Russia that exists in the Western countries is an overlap from the war situation with the Nazis, especially in Germany. It is after the war, there was always a quote that I heard in family reunions that Churchill said, "We killed the wrong pig." Which means they should have gone against the Soviets and not against Germany. That was something. And then, that's another thing that is hugely important is Operation Unthinkable, that the British planned to continue the fight with Germans against Russia, against Soviet Union at that time, Soviet Union. And then you notice that these attitudes of the Soviets who had been, for example, treated as prisoners of war, always as the worst. It was if
Hmm.
you were a Soviet, that was you were at the end of anything. Yeah. So these attitudes still exist. So to wrap that up, in Germany, it's a sensitive issue still, and not for good reasons. I think only for bad reasons.
Yeah, on that, my father, he worked in a factory since he was about 13, and they had a lot of, he remembers the German POWs who were working in those factories, except that there were POWs in that by the end of 1940s, begin 1950s, they weren't allowed to go back to Germany. But most of them, from what we said, most of them lived in apartments. He was in Heidekamp at that point. Most of them lived in apartments, and when they were released, most of them never left the Germany because they already had wives and children and civilians that they'd married, Russian women that already had children, so they never left. Uh, but on the flip side, there's more and more articles slowly starting to filter out that the U.S. had set up concentration camps for German POWs in 1944. Well, Eisenhower gave a command that when the Rhineland was crossed, there would be no prisoners taken, shoot everyone. His frontline generals disobeyed. They took prisoners, but there were no facilities for these prisoners set up ahead of time. So they just put them in the fields, surrounded them with concertina wire, and let them sit there. And a lot of them died from dysentery, from the cold. There was a one interesting article I read by a guy who was 16 who was when he was taken prisoner at the very end of World War II on the Western Front. And he said he spent a year in one of these camps and he watched half the people die in it. And there were actually a
Hmm.
couple of books that came out about the hidden casualties amongst the
Buck.
POWs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about 1 million people, 1 million German POWs that at the end of 44 through 46, they were dead. I don't know where they got buried, but they were never listed as people that were that died in camps, or never listed at all, past the initial reports that the camp heads were putting in every day. And again, this was all buried.
Yes,
And
my father-in-law had been a prisoner in the Rheinwiesenlager.
oh,
He was at the end of the war, he was drafted, he was 16 and a half years.
hmm
And he got a very short training, and then he went there and he didn't talk about it. He was all when I asked him, because that was a topic in the documentary that I
hmm
mentioned. I made another documentary was called Soldiers Behind Wire. It was about prisoners of war. I had the Soviet. It was three parts. I had the
hmm
Soviet part, so I had Soviet prisoners in Germany, German prisoners in the Soviet Union. And there was another guy who had the Western part, and that was so touchy that in the version of
Yeah.
the that it wasn't touched. The book, for example, from Jacques, a Canadian guy, that was considered. We had a specialist from the Bundeswehr. He was a colonel and he was an historian, and he is a specialist for prisoners of war. But from the American side was put down. And then that's why I asked my father-in-law, he'd been there, and he told the story like you. He said he'd been there and that had been, they lived in holes in the ground. And you can imagine in the winter time
Oh,
and when there's snow coming and rain coming, yeah, they just die off like flea, yeah, and flies. And it is uh, so that is a thing that the historian, if you touch it as a journalist, it doesn't help your career. Yeah, that is, I think we have to understand one thing that I always said is if I make a documentary about the Third Reich and I make a documentary and say something bad about Nazis and it's wrong, no problem. If I paint them in one instance worse than they have really been, no problem. But if I do the same with the American side, big problem. So has to be, and this is what I mean is not correct. We should be very careful with how we investigate. But the point, the larger point, this is what I noticed, for example, about the Red Army. I had a ton of stories from German soldiers who were telling that there were some Russian ensigned people who wanted to kill them, and an officer came and stopped that. So the attitude the attitude in the camps, it was, for example, not that they were intentionally put down or starved. It was the situation was very bad for everybody. They got probably the same, he said, as the other, not as the Soviet guards, but as the other prisoners who had been there. They
hmm
were not treated worse. And when it became better, it became better. There's one story I'd like to share with you because the Stalingrad prisoners, 5% of them survived. That is early in the war, a huge
hmm
amount of people. And I interviewed a guy who had been on a Napola. So he was a real Nazi, but a very young person. And he changed to being some kind of a, let's say, democratic socialist in the camp because he simply and he was telling extremely good stories. Yeah. So what he told me was that he was in a survival mode when he was in after Stalingrad there. He was looking at how the people dwindled. You dwindle quite fast when you don't have food.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
he went to the garbage heap And the Soviet officers, they ate dried fish and they cut off the heads and the tails. And he went to the garbage heap and ate the heads and tails. And his comrade said, "You're eating garbage." And he says, "Yes, because I want to survive." And so it said, after some time, the others died off from hunger, but he had an advantage. He had a few days or few weeks more. And then he survived. And then he told me, you have to understand in a prisoner of war camps, it's not that the good parts of humans come out. If you want hell on earth, you just have to do nothing.
Oh yeah.
But to keep in a camp, to keep in order, it is a constant thing. And he said the first to die off are the people who are honest, who share your bread with others, the people who are sensible, who are empathic, who are artists also. And then I thought, okay, now I get the usual social Darwinist talk about only the strong survive. And then he said, you have to understand that all the people that die first are the ones that make a human society human. The what stays are people like me, and believe me, you don't want to live in a society that consists only of people like me. So this is for you, young men, to understand that war is the ultimate crime because it deplores a society of humanity. Yeah, if you want a human society, you have to make sure that you don't get into a situation like that. That stuck in my mind. Yeah, and it's really, I asked other people about it, and that is true. For example, they also told me that how important it is that you have books and they had theater plays, because that is something when you're down to
Hmm.
hunger, that keeps you alive is also culture. It's not
Yep.
only food. It is something like that. So that was, and the what I wanted to note is that there were a lot of stories where they told everybody had a story of a Soviet female doctor who he fell in love with because she treated him kindly. That was something where you could see the attitude of the people come back, where not the Russians are monsters, but rather if you give them the chance to be human, they will be. Even with their former enemy, they're not full of hatred all the time. They don't think you all should die. Yeah, that is what I got back. That had a strong impression on me because that is not fair how we view Soviets, Russians, and it still spills over to today. Yeah.
Something that people don't understand. 1941, Stalin had what you might call a slight come to Jesus moment, because he quite literally got scared. He got scared because he was a priest in training, and when I'm scared, but not of the Germans invading, or actually, it wasn't even the Germans. It was the New European Order, so most of Europe invading, along with Hitler. But so in 20 on the 22nd, when Barbarossa kicks off. On the 23rd of June, the last cathedral in Sergei Posad was set to be demolished. And Sergei Posad is the throne of the patriarchy. So Stalin took that in a bad way, as a very bad sign. And after the war, by the way, the entire monastery complex, was rebuilt by the young communists. He would send them there. And the reason I'm going with this is during the siege of Leningrad, not only were there plays that were going on, like you said, culture kept people going. There were 17 churches that were open, and Stalin gave out 17 awards of the Hero of the Soviet Union, the civilian side, to the priests that kept their churches open and running through the entire siege, because they helped the morale of the people. They kept the city going. So there was a really in certain, and then the patriarchy was back by end of 42. They had the patriarch back on the throne for the first time in 20 years. So that was, as you're saying, that kept the morale going. And again, that's something
Mhm.
else that's never heard of in the West. That
Yes. And I think it's also for me, I've been in Russia now several times since the late 90s. And Russia is a deeply Christian society. And now you have Vladimir Putin. in charge in Russia, and it's a mild conservative kind of economic system. It's a deeply Christian society. 80% of the Russians say they're a Christian background, much more than anywhere in Europe. I'm in Sweden right now, and there's hardly any Christianity left. It's just the churches owns the forest. That's about it. Yeah. So, and you still the way the Russians are depicted is the same attitude as towards why Soviet communism was so bad. It's I had been a soldier in the NATO after my school years. I was still drafted in Germany, and we were told that we have to be careful of the Soviet Union because of five star with five edges. That's the five continents, and they want to conquer and so on. And they were depicted like totalitarianism, and we have freedom of speech. Ha ha! Nowadays, yeah, and it's we have freedoms and they have not, and we have to protect that. It's not that we have to fight a war, we have to protect that. And then Russia changes, but that's like a philosophical argument. If you have such a change that the Russians who are deeply Christian, you just, if they, it's again, if they have the chance to be Christian, they will become. They are more Christian than any other population that I know. And the thing completely changed. It's different, but the attitudes of the West are still the same. So the attitudes was not because of communism or a totalitarian ideology. It's something deeper rooted in the Western mind. That is the big problem. And that also needs to be addressed. It's not rational. There's a strong irrational moment in that which is preventing peace also nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't. Everybody talks about, well, that know history just a little bit. They talk about, oh, Russia's been invaded multiple times. There was Hitler. There was Napoleon. Well, the first pan-Western invasion of Russia was in 1012 AD by Prince Boleslav Hrabry, who was the Prince of Krakow, and his coalition from various lords of the Holy Roman Empire. They grabbed Kiev, pushed Vladimir Krasnosonce, Saint Vladimir, the Red Sun, out, but they couldn't hold on to it, so they got eventually pushed back. But after that, every 2, 3 generations, you wind up with this mass invasion, mass invasion, mass invasion, to the point where even in Kalikovo Polye, where Dmitry Donskoy defeats Mamayev and the Western Mongols, there's large elements of European Arbequars and European pikemen that were present on the side of the Mongols. It's just been this continuous 1,000-year history of invasions, of continuous invasions. Be it Teutonic Knights, be it Swedish, the Swedes. It's just nonstop. Do you think this is we're heading to another episode, or do you think the European leadership may come to their senses before they continue history?
I would hope so, but I don't think so. To be honest, in a realistic terms, it's not going into a good direction. And I think I'm old enough to remember a time when politicians from all sides, we had some very bright minds, so to speak, with deep-seated convictions, and a lot of that was influenced by World War II. Reasonable people on all sides that I got to know were not something like this, never again. That was even when I did my story on prisoners of war. I was invited by a former Soviet soldier. He had terrible things that he endured. That was they put, like you said, they put people in a camp and just put barbed wire and around it and let them starve to death. And from time to time throw bread in there to see them fighting for the bread, the Germans. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that is, he was telling that. So he had every reason to, let's say, have a deep-rooted hatred against Germans, but he wasn't that way. He wanted to know how I am, and in the end, it turned out that we are hanging in each other's arms and promising a shit like this never again. Okay, never again. And there was even another guy who said we should have always been friends. because we are very similar. This is what I noticed. I was raised in the West, so my attitude was towards the Soviet Union when I first came to Russia. I noticed exactly that. I said in an interview recently, if you'd leave us without influence, we would be magnetic. We would go
Mhm.
together because that's the whole mindset is in a way that would work very well together. Yeah, it's we have capabilities on both sides which would be together, that it would be much more than just the add-on of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So so that is something, and I don't see that. What I see in the European politicians now is a class of half-baked idiots, I would say. And they are, it's very bad. It's very bad in Germany. If you look at our, I call her Annalena the brain Baerbock, yeah, who is maybe not intelligent enough to put a bucket of water into the edge of a room, yeah. It is,
Internet.
enormous. That was somebody who tried to I would call him a real patriot for Germany because
Mhm.
he wanted to have Germany inside Europe, and that's the thing for Germans that they have to understand that we are too important and too big to be silent, but too small to govern. We are in a situation where we have nine neighboring countries. We are in the middle of Europe, so we have to be good neighbors. That was a sentence from Willy Brandt, and
Mhm.
we want to be the country of good neighbors. So their attitude was exactly on top, and they changed the attitude in the East. Right now, what we have is, I don't know, it's suicidal. It's if you look at buying American gas, that's the thing where you can see LNG 5 times the price. The German business model was cheap gas, cheap energy from the east, like always 30 to 40%, and producing industrial goods which are very expensive and selling them abroad. And we that was destroyed now by our big allies, the Americans. I don't believe for a
Wait,
second.
I thought
I
it was
think the
Ukrainians on a little rowboat with the
yeah, yeah,
grenades.
yeah, yeah. With a the one argument against it, because I just don't only want to brag against it. If you go into the Baltic, is about the pipeline goes through waters 30 to
Mhm.
40 meters deep. So why do you go to the deepest place, 80 meters, where you need special equipment and a decompression chamber? Nobody can tell me that a decompression chamber attached to the sailing boat. If you go down for 1 hour to work there, you need several hours of decompression, and you're in cold water. So you need to have a decompression chamber. So the story they may have I think it's a cover story, and the cover story is always true. It's not false. To give another example, the cover story, there was a search for two American submarines, the Scorpion and the Thresher, nuclear submarines that sank in the Atlantic. And the Americans, there were ideas that maybe the Scorpion it was sunk by a torpedo. It was its own torpedo officially. It could have been different. So I did a documentary on that. They wanted to know. And they sent it out. It was Bob Ballard. And the cover story was the search for the Titanic. And they had journalists on board, and they would testify when they came back. Yeah, 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 we were sink the Titanic, and here are the wonderful pictures. And you see that it was paid for by the U.S. Navy. And a good cover story is true, but it deviates you from the thing that really happened. So I think the Ukrainians are a cover story. There's so much evidence that the USA was the perpetrator. I did my last documentary that I did for ZDF Arte was about. I had Thomas Reed, Secretary of the Air Force in
Mhm.
Reagan, and he told that they blew up the Yamal pipeline in 1982. So this is an ongoing thing. The
Yeah.
division that's another thing from Egon Barr. He said, if you look at World War II, after World War II, Germany and France, who had a common history, World War One, Verdun, yeah, there were demonstrations, and there were a strong wish not to have something like this mass slaughter again, yeah. And then you had World War II, and after World War II, Germany and France, the eternal enemies. That's what my father was told in school. France is the eternal enemy of Germany. The eternal enemies were becoming the motors of European reunification. And they did that by working together on coal and steel, the Montan contracts. So by doing good deals, by doing economic cooperation, they created the trust that was needed politically. And the same was with the pipelines between Russia and Germany. So the Americans needed these pipelines cut because they were a connection that would lead to this slow movement of coming together. And that is something that you see. That is a recurring theme, which we need to understand that in the West, there was the idea you have this huge Russian empire, the biggest state in the world. And it's a lot of things there. Everything is there that you need. So cut it up into
Yeah.
different countries and get them under control. This is since the British Empire. This is an idea that is in the West, and it was strong in the United States when Gorbachev came and peace broke out. Basically, and then in the U.S. you can see it's very interesting to listen to people like Jeffrey Sachs when he was an advisor to Gorbachev and Yeltsin. And what they wanted was to become a normal country and live peacefully, basically. And they were asking, can we do that? And there were other people that they talked to, like Sachs or the ambassador to Ukraine. What's his name? He writes excellent articles about Ukraine. Yeah, so there were reasonable people in the government, but there were people in the core like Cheney and Rumsfeld and George Bush Sr. and so on, who always had this idea. Well, we won the Cold War, so
Right.
where is our? Why don't we take everything? Why should we look and what is the idea to make them strong? Sachs goes over there to help them with the economy. We just won the war against them, and you want to refurbish them with everything. This is the core situation, not that Putin wants to govern the world. The core situation is this: America thinks they want the code, the people think we have the bounty. Yeah, we haven't, but we can do it again. This is what happened then after 1989. Okay.
Yeah, the U.S. won the Cold War sort of like you win at billiards if your opponent sinks the eight ball out of place. He's lost, but you haven't really won because quite literally up to the last 6 months of the Cold War, even maybe even less than that. The CIA was reporting that the Soviet Union is going to be here for quite a while. There's nothing wrong with it. It's economically still feasible. They had no idea. They really, and they still don't have any idea.
Hmm.
I'll say from Yeltsin and the Gorbachev period, the worst way to motivate Russians is to tell them you're just going to be an average country. That just kills morale in Russia. The best way to motivate Russia is we're going to be the first ones on Mars. We're going to build the biggest this. We're going to build the biggest that. That motivates Russians. And they'll go beyond and above and beyond to do that because it's a mentality of a great country. If we're going for great
Mhm.
things, we're going to go do that. If we just have to be average, then everything falls apart. Uh,
Good. There's another great person, which is John F. Kennedy. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, he and Khrushchev, they really came together. They were standing at the
mhm.
abyss looking down, and from that is also great politicians, great statesmen, that after the situation, they rose. They understood that something like this, never again.
Mhm.
We were very close to destroying the world. And there was a proposal out to do the moon landing together.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
So that would have been something. It would be so symbolic that you say you have the people with the rockets would work together. That is that is already something that creates, the two military industrial complexes working together instead of against each other is interesting. But then that you have a new frontier, that you have space. And the first humans that leave planet Earth and go to space and land on the first, and that would be together. That would have been a symbol of human destiny in a way,
Hmm.
which would, I think it would, that would have been an enormous thing. Just
Yeah.
if you think about when I was a boy, it was the moon landing. I saw it in TV. Yeah. So that at that time it was really important. It's not so important anymore, strangely enough. Yeah. But at that time, and these things are possible. Yeah, this is what I try to talk with my children about that. That what we're missing is this the outlook a better life for everybody. A
Yep.
political system, a worldwide political system where you can say, I want to be part of that. I really want to be part of that. Not that you're forced into it, or not that they tell you with a gun to your temple that you have to do this and that. That is, it seems that this is my also my argument against the European and the
Internet.
root of that you have to have a situation. It's all military thinking.
Oh
It's
yeah.
no civilizational political thinking. This is they are so bad that my first wish is to get out of the European Union because that's a big trap. The
Hmm.
promise of a democracy is that you can vote, and if you don't like them after 4 years, you can vote them out. I cannot. I'm a prisoner of the European Union. I cannot vote for the people who are governing me there. And they have sanctions against people who don't have their own opinion. It's so bad that I think it has not been worse after World War II in the European nations than it is now.
You mentioned Kennedy, and we of course know he was assassinated, and possibly with Israeli help too. While we're at it, which seems to have come out from those documents, the little bit that actually did come out of the documents. But nobody also remembers that Nixon was also removed, and they were removed for the same reason. You had a
Yes.
Democrat and a Republican. They moved for some reason. They both said, "We've got our sphere. The Soviet Union has their sphere. We can live together peacefully, and just keep to our spheres." And the industrial military industrial complex wasn't too happy with either one of them. I guess you couldn't shoot Nixon. That would have been a little too suspicious at that point. So they got him out on something so trivial that today's politicians in America wouldn't even notice. I mean, Watergate was a joke compared to what's going on today. But and you're right. The
Yeah,
politicians
it
that we
was
get in
the
the
guy
West
who gave
now.
the information. Exactly. No, that is the thing that's also rarely known. Not people. It needs to be investigated more because just for one example, the guy from the FBI who gave the tips to the Washington Post was the one responsible for what you using the Blacks movement, the Black Panthers, and the inside movement. They were infiltrated and then made to commit violent crimes. And the same guy who did that was in charge of that operation, was supposed to be the good guy trying to save America from Richard Nixon. That should be the starting point where you think maybe the whole story could be a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah. So
But what
what
was his
is
name? Bob Felt, or what was it? Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. I cannot remember. I'm horrible with
Yeah.
names. What's the situation right now in Europe with some? I'm hearing there's been a lot of accidents for people that aren't excited with the trajectory of the European Union and NATO toward war. Uh, is there repression coming back in? Serious repression to that level?
Yes, I think it should be viewed in the way that if you look at what is happening, there is repression. There is repression in the terms of freedom of speech. To talk about the future, you would have to have different ideas. And the first part is always that you understand. If they say there's an insult in Germany, is you're a person understanding Putin. And I said, yes, of course, I'm a journalist. I have to understand what he thinks if I report on them. I have to be a Xi Jinping understander. I even have to be a Kim Jong-un understander. I always have to understand what they want from a politician and then to see how you can get along. That is another example that I got from Egon Bahr. He said how they came up with the detente idea was he was with Willy Brandt in Berlin, and then
Hmm.
the Berlin Wall was built. And in Berlin, although there was a wall, there were certain things like the railway, the Straßenbahns, so the subway and these kind hospitals, energy production, which needed cooperation. You couldn't simply cut it off completely. So about 40,000 people in Berlin had to cross from east to west every day. And they had to sit together and find a way how to do that. And he said, they took the most pragmatic people from both sides and they started to work together. And from working together, they understood that they could work together. It spilled over into other issues. We're starting to discuss. And this, Egon Bahr said, that's where I got the idea from détente with. It was change by rapprochement was the
Mhm.
slogan. So if you work together, you create an atmosphere. It's the whole thing of trade. Trade is not the same as capitalism. Yeah, trade is that is something that is very human. It
Right.
always happens. It doesn't mean that you want to rule the economy or so. It is so by this they got into a situation where they were talking. And this would be to do that, you need to create possibilities. And creating that would mean that you have German and Russian schools exchanging pupils. If you think that Alexei is an asshole and I'm in love with Olga, you don't think about Russians as being this or that. It's
Right.
individuals, and that's the most natural way to get people. You always, if you go somewhere, if you travel, you will notice that you like a lot of people. That is simple, simple. So that's a good thing. And they cut off all these direct connections. I'd been on a tour in 2017 with 200 people, and it was called Družba. It was a go there, look yourself. And they called us Putin's coffee travel, people who are not able to to work against it. It's betrayal. Yeah. Instead of that, instead of having communications, you do, basic idea for a TV show was you have a town hall in Russia and you have a town hall in Germany, and the people are there by random. You pick them by random, and they can ask each other and talk to each other without people telling them what to think. Yeah, then you would get, it would be very interesting to see what
Mhm.
normal people, what they want to know from each other. That would be a method of getting along with it. And nothing of that is there. So I would say that in Europe, the whole situation is absolutely mind control. It is that they want to control your attitudes, and anybody who sticks out will be raised off like with a lawn lower. Yeah, who has ideas that don't fit with them. My best example is I really admire Jacques Beau, the
Mhm. Oh,
Swiss.
yes.
He had
Yeah.
been in the military training, and I can he's also a good intelligence officer for a democratic country. I told him, you are my role model for an intelligence officer in a democratic country. And he's sanctioned by the European
Oh,
Union.
yeah.
That tells me if things like that happen, it tells you how far off you are from any path where the compass needle points into a direction where I want to go.
Yeah. And that's something that, most people don't. I don't know how much Europeans, okay. So from our side, from what you see, is there are two types in the European Union and the government. There's the ones that are fanatics that actually want a world war, or try to take Moscow again, and then there's the ones that are just grifters making money off of it, off the war propaganda and off the rebuilding. But from the
Big money
side of
making machine.
it's a huge money making machine. But from the side of Russia, you know, the people that are screaming war, war, war every day, you hear war every day. We're going to break the country up into 30, 40, 50 little pieces. All that people hear that. The politicians hear that. And the attitude has hardened. If they want war, they're going to get war. We'll give them war if they want
Yes.
war. I don't know how much do they understand that even if they're grifters and they're only making money off of it, they are marching themselves into an actual conflict. Uh,
Yes,
it,
and I
it,
think they don't understand. They don't understand. The problem is, I during my work, I had access to quite to several members of parliament, and I was rarely impressed. Most of these people are, let's say, politicians on a mentally on a medium level. They are not Egon Bass. They don't think in terms of grander political schemes and how do you position your country in the world and having a strategy and then having the tactics for that. They are quite shorthand. And then there's another problem, which is the filter bubbles. They don't only exist in Facebook, they also exist in the parliaments. The people that make it to the top of the institutions, they sort out any dissidents. And that is a thing that, for example, the East Germans understand better than the West Germans. I think East Germany suffocated by getting rid of their dissidents. They don't they know that these people are necessary. You're necessary. You need open speech. You need that is even an old philosophical argument from the 19th century from Great Britain. Yeah? That if you suppress an opinion, even if it's sounds strange or it's completely nuts, you devoid yourself of the possibility to listen to an argument that could give you something that you never thought before.
Yeah.
So, and other than that, an opinion that needs to be protected by harsh measures is not very strong in itself. It can't stand itself. It needs structures to keep it, which is the so these are all things that I thought when I was in school and at university that are universal, that are part of the Western thinking, that you need, and that it is wise if you are a politician that you make sure that there are people who criticize you and you also listen to them and talk to them. So it is that you understand that all visions that we have, all perspectives are limited, and you need to get off that. And that's not true anymore for the politicians. They are, if somebody comes and say, look, I don't think that the conflict in Ukraine was unprovoked. And it definitely wasn't. It was the most provoked conflict that has been on the Eastern Western sphere for this after Second World War. And you say that, and you get already in trouble. Then you know that you're really in trouble because it's what we are missing is not a few people that can be exchanged. It is a system that allows that. And this is why I'm not very optimistic because I don't see that. I see, for example, when I talk to people in Russia from the diplomatic side, wow, yeah, and same applies for India, for Iran, for China. You have very, very educated people. And then, as I said, if I'm in Germany, I'm not completely. You shouldn't think too high of us. The intellectual level in Germany is medium. It's knee high. It is not, and that is because the political, and you could say the same in a way about the American political system. If you see which people come to the top, then the an analysis should be there's something wrong with the system if we have these people on top. Our system of sorting out people puts away the people that are reasonable, the McGregors, the Wilkersons, the Jeffrey Sachs. You can Judge Napolitano. You can one after the other. These are all people who I would trust. I would like to see in the government, and they all have been put aside. And then what I hear in the news is that I say, "Oh my God!" Yeah, and that's by the point is the rest of the world sees that too. The whole global South sees that. So we are not, and the worst part is for East-West is that I think we have alienated Russia so much that I don't see how you can fix that again without knowing that they know that the people in charge are completely different. I think they lost confidence in us. And that alone is diplomatically such a failure that I only have insults for for the people who are responsible for that. Yeah.
While you were talking, could you hear the sirens, the air raid sirens? I'm not sure if
No,
the speaker
I'm
filters out a
sorry.
lot. Yeah, we just had where I'm staying, we get air raid sirens about 5, 10 times a day from Ukrainian drones flying through, aiming. They're usually aiming at civilians. Russians don't panic.
It is
People on the beaches are on the beaches. People walking streets are walking streets. It's just background noise.
unbelievable, unbelievable. I just
Oh, it
want to
just kicked
say
off
there's a,
again. Second one just kicked off.
yeah, I hear it now. Yeah. I hear it now.
day and night.
I'm I'm very
Russians don't
sorry. I
panic.
want to apologize for that for the people who are from Russia who are listening to that. They should know it's that there are people who think that this is awful. We are not all idiots. We have hardly any politicians who are not idiots, but not everybody in the population. To be realistic, about slightly less than half are in favor of that. We're very much propagandized, yeah. But the attitude that was also interesting for me, the generation of my father who had been fighting in World War II. And they were like, poking the Russians. Do they really think that's a good idea? Should you do that? Yeah. That was something that from that generation, this is what I mean. The people who went through the World War II, they know that something like that, no good idea. It's like Helmut Schmidt said, it's better to talk 100 hours than to shoot 1 minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that is, yeah. So, and the Russians understand that. The point is, what is so bad about it, that the Russian attitude towards war is one that of a country that had suffered enormously. From the American side, that's 27 million dead in Russia, 400,000 in USA, and all of World War II. That was something where some people died, a lot of people died, and others could make a career, and it was an empire building situation. The attitudes toward that is in Russia completely different. It's not the same. They are not on the same level of empire thinking.
Yeah, but that's also a different issue too, is war is such a big part of Russian history because we constantly have been invaded, we've counter-invaded, and it's gone back and forth for so long. You can't scare Russians with war. Russians, it's something I don't think the West understands, particularly Americans, because American people are often scared of war. They're not scared of war when it's somewhere over there. They're blowing somebody up. I remember 9/11. 9/11, there was a nationwide panic. Schools and office buildings in little towns in the middle of absolutely nowhere, Kansas, were closing down, and everybody's running home. Oh, because of the terrorist attacks in New York and in Washington. No terrorist is going to come to your town and blow up your town. Nobody can even find that on a map. But everything closed down. The entire country closed down. And everybody ran for the shelters. Russians, like it or not, war has been part of our history for so long. Russians don't want war, but if it's going to be war, it'll be war. That's the mentality. If you want to fight, we'll fight you. And that's the mentality. And when it becomes an existential crisis, so you know, you got kids on the beaches going, "Hey, it's the fifth one. It's the sixth one," counting the sirens that are coming through. As the Western supply drones were used on civilians. It's a prime example, just a little off the side, Gorlovka, which I've been to multiple times. Gorlovka is the front line for 12 years. Road of Death, which is the western edge of Gorlovka. I've been up and down that road, and it's just burned out cars everywhere because they hit the road with artillery, mortars, so it damages the road. So you got to go slow, and then they use drones to hit cars. But the population of Gorlovka before the conflict started was 380,000 people. 380,000 people. Gorlovka has not had running water for 12 years because the Ukrainians used anti-bunker artillery to destroy the water mains. They constantly hit the pumping stations so they get repaired. Well, having said all that, and having seen firsthand, by the way, on the first streets, burnt out apartments, not apartment buildings, just apartments, where Ukrainians will bring up a drone, FPV drone. They look in the windows, they see people in the windows, and they slam that drone and blow up the apartment and burn out the apartment and kill the civilians. Haven't seen all that, haven't been there multiple times. The present population of Gorlovka is 320,000. And people
Hmm.
living for 12 years in these countries and their attitude is, this is our land, we're not going anywhere. You can kill us, but you can't make us leave. And I don't think that's an attitude that the Europeans actually, well, the non-Russian Europeans anyways, seem to understand.
Hmm.
Threats of war doesn't work.
Yeah, there's
Peace
also,
works. Threats of war
I
doesn't
think
work.
I'm not that there's a strong connection to your motherland in Russia, yeah, which
Mhm.
is not the same in Western Europe and not the same in a way in the USA. But I would also like to remind people that I've been in the USA a lot of times, and the usual, let's say, the American that I met, especially in the flyover state, are kind.
Oh yeah,
They are
yeah,
not warmongering idiots. If you give
right.
them a chance, they were also we could get along really well. It's that's what we have to understand, that
Yeah.
the people who keep us apart from each other, that's not the Russian, the American. It is our governments and not the government in Russia. I would exclude that because it's also, when I talk to people from the scientific side, if you call that scientific, yeah, political science, I don't know if I should call it science, but from the people who are at universities with that, then there's the people who are knowledgeable, and I know several people who are really knowledgeable about the Cold War, and then they say the Soviets and the Russians have been so patient that the Americans were going, what is wrong with them? They were provoking them and they wouldn't react to that. But on the other hand, you have to understand that if you really, they are dancing tango on the red lines of Russia, and this won't go on forever. That is why. Why? What is the intended outcome? Where do they want to head for that? Do they really want a war? And it seems that we have people who are tending towards war because they think they are the smartest ass in the room, and if they are smart enough, then they will bluff the Russians into submission. Yeah, and my attitude is it won't work.
No.
Go to Russia, how you describe them. That is, you won't, that's what, again, Egon Bahr said. It's no good idea to humiliate the population of a big, old, historic country. No good idea. Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, um, I don't see anything good coming out of this anywhere down the line. The interesting thing is from Germany. I have a friend, Vladimir Gerd. Vladimir was a Russian German. He moved to Germany back in the 90s, raised his family there. When he joined the Alternative for Deutschland party and became a deputy in the
Tag.
Bundestag, yeah, right, Bundestag. For he wasn't aiming to become a politician, but he came to a meeting and they needed somebody, so they talked him into it. And he said, first of all, the moment he got elected, the people he'd been friends with for 20 years, they'd walk across the street from him. They wouldn't pass him on the street. They wouldn't pass his wife's friends, stopped talking to her because, oh, you're now the enemy on that
Mhm.
level, on a personal level. So politics was above, familiarity and friendship of 20 years. But he's now back in Russia and he's running an organization to help Russian Germans and German Germans to immigrate into Russia. So there's got over 2 million applications that are in process. And then we have Merz who stated that, all the Russian Germans are possible Putin agents and they have to be watched. And yeah, that's 8 million people. It's I guess that's the Jews of this era. But it's
Yeah.
insanity. It's absolute insanity.
Yes, it is, and that's another issue. I'm from left wing, and when the AfD started to be elected in the parliaments, then it's a simple question. If you think democracy is a good thing, then the judgment of the voter is the most important thing, and you just have to abide. So if you're a journalist, the same way. And I could never have imagined that the Green Party would be on top of the people who are now doing this kind of things. And it's again, it's simply it's a thing of understanding basic politics, of intellectual capability, and of culture that everybody should understand. If you treat others kindly and in a way that you can talk, that you say, okay, let's meet in a restaurant and we talk, and it will not be official, but we need to stay in contact and we need to have capabilities. So diplomatic relations always have to be possible. And this is, again, now in Germany, the attitude is this, that AfD is somehow, it's Satan. And if you listen to it and then you get infected, you get a
Yeah.
plague. Yeah. And this is all bullshit because a lot of the people are simply and for example, I once could talk to Tino Kruppalla. He's like the second highest guy on the AfD. And I would say he's a very reasonable person. I'd like to have him as a neighbor. It's not nobody where I think it's terrible that he exists. It is even that I would say he's a good guy. I would
Yeah.
trust him. I will probably, if it vote for a person, that is a person I would vote for. Yeah. And this is we have all have to be and I noticed the same in the USA, by the way, with the Republicans and the Democrats. There has to be something new. That is, inside this system, there won't be any change. You
Yeah.
need something to change completely. And the same applies for Europe. And we have in Europe the situation that what I call the Baltic poisonous dwarfs, yeah, these small
Mhm.
states
So,
who are that is and they and then I think who is in favor of that? That's always I don't understand who thinks that he has an advantage if these people are running our business. They run us against the wall. Yeah,
yeah.
it's yeah, okay. Yeah.
You know, myself, my own politics, I'm a monarchist. I'm a constitutional monarchist. So I guess I'd be right.
Okay.
State capitalism. You have to, the state has to be able to help plan the economy with the industry. And a mercantilist. And I have multiple friends who are hardcore communists. And the interesting thing is these days, you can actually sit down at a table and you can discuss things with them because the real divide isn't left and right. The real divide is nativists or localists that want their country, well, nationalists, I guess you could call it that, not ultra, but nationalists, that want their country to prosper, and globalists that want this hegemony over everybody, make everybody into just a bio unit. You know, you're a production
Mhm.
unit, you're a consumption unit, you're not a human being. But that I think is the real divide. But everybody's still looking left and right. I mean, there's a lot of middle ground that you can work together with and build. I mean, every economic system now is a mixed economy to one degree or another. Uh, Neither
Yes,
side,
and
neither
then
extreme works by itself.
it is what I noticed, what I noticed, and I always say that, and then I met with disbelief and called it propagandist, that discussions in Russia are much more lively than they are in
Oh,
Germany
yeah.
because telling what you think and having a point and what we call in Germany having an ass in your trouser, yeah, that you that is something that has gets respect.
Yeah.
Whereas in Germany, you have to be careful. So I say freedom, freedom of speech. We say freedom of opinion, which tells you something that is a very bad expression. Freedom of speech is important, that you can discuss what you and you can elaborate while you talk with the other person. Then it becomes vivid, and it is. And that's it's much more that I see. I don't see in Russian. They call it an autocracy, and people are afraid, and this happens to that, and this that. Might be in every country you have that, but I see in the attitude of the people that I talked to with Russia, and that was especially true when I was in St. Petersburg, in the cafes there. That is the intellectual level is very interesting, very good, interesting people. It's nothing to look down on, it's something to learn from. Good Chinese saying, if three people stand together, there are two that you can learn from. That's what we should notice.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, if you look at it, I'm in the liberal Democrats, which are actually a misnomer because they're very conservative. But you have the United Russia, you have the liberal Democrats, you even have who are the conservative side. You have the communists, which are core, culturally conservative. Well, the communists have been culturally conservative since the 1930s. Um, after making a muck of things in the 1920s, culturally. But you've got New People Party, which is basically liberal light. They're not quite Apple, which was extremely pro-Western liberal. They're liberal light. You've got Справедливая Россия, which I guess the closest word I guess in English would be Justice Russia, but that's not quite more like social justice Russia, but that still doesn't really encompass what the word means. But you've got
Mm.
five parties in Parliament. You look at the Americans, for example, or the British for that matter. You really have two parties, and there's
Yes.
really not much of a difference at the end of the day. They're all playing off the same text. You
You were gone. You were gone for 10 seconds or
know,
so. Yeah. So
I was,
your parties, if you look at the Americans and the British, I can understand that argument.
yeah.
After that, you were gone.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at the Americans and the English, they're based, and not only the Canadians, a lot of their countries, they're really only running off of one sheet of music with just a little variation to the left or the right. But it's the same global sheet of music.
Yeah, that's a saying in the United States. You have one party with two right wings. Yeah, but
Yeah.
be that as it may, it's the one party thing is that it's not really a system that where you have different opinions. If you
Yeah.
want to hear different opinions, you have to go somewhere else, not inside that system. And it's so I see more that the USA is, in a way, more vivid. There's more, something like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. And now, as I said, I'm a leftist, and these are the people that I would consider that I listen to because they are upfront. Yeah, and if I listen to my colleagues, the so-called liberal colleagues in the mainstream media, then no way. This is not a
Yeah.
way not a way forward. It's not even. Yeah, I've been interviewed in Belarus when I was there on TV, and I said, "Look, my opinion on this is that we as journalists, have more in common than let's say on a scale of I myself in my country with people who are in politics." It's the famous line and from Casablanca, what is your nationality? I'm an alcoholic, yeah, and I say
Yeah.
nationality is I'm a journalist, and you are too. And so our job is to discuss, but to discuss in a way that is it a good idea? Is it interesting? And whenever somebody comes up with something, my task is to make sure that he's able to say it, and that everything that is there as an idea is visible and hearable to the
Yeah.
audience. That you make your decisions. I just help you. This is why I like Jack Bo. He said he gave the politicians
Right.
the
Yeah.
information as a military analyst to make reasonable decisions. They don't do it, but it's not his part to filter it before. It has to lay out the scope. And this is really what also journalism that it's about. So, as a journalist, no matter what your own political opinions are, you should get along with people who do that, no matter where their political origin is. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be that important for what you do there. Like a doctor, if you're a doctor, it's not important. You don't say, you're the same political opinion, I give you medication and you get poisoned because I don't like your opinion. This is not what a doctor should be.
Right.
So this is these are the attitudes there, yeah. And then that is the saddest part. There I see that Europe, we are really we're going down. We don't notice, and I don't see the rescue boat. I don't see the lifeboat that could take us away from the Titanic. A lot of people are dancing slow waltz in the Titanic and think they will never sink, and I don't think that's true. We will sink. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And people have been they've been snookered into the left-right dialectic. Now that he's and a lot of times it's almost like a football team. It's this is my football club, that's their football club. I'm just going to cheer for them because that's my football club.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the globalists are the ones that are manipulating. They're destroying both sides. They've divided the people up, and nobody notices. They're absolutely blind as the
Mm.
rights go away, as the freedoms go away. And Jack Bauer, yeah, I've got a lot of respect for the man, and he gave him unfiltered opinion, and he got sanctioned for it. For,
Yeah, yeah,
that's the
yeah,
state
yeah.
of things.
That's
It's
where you
insane.
see that it is insane. And then on the other hand, you see that I watched that with glee when they took out Tucker Carlson, and
Oh
then he
yeah,
made his own program, and it was very successful. Yeah, so at least that part of the, let's say, of the free market economy, where you could say, yeah, that is at least it offers the not at least it offers the possibility. So that is a good part.
yes.
They tried to get him away. They didn't succeed because that chance is there. And there is this attitude of being rebellious, which is not negative in the United States, which is still, I wouldn't have believed it 10 years ago, but in Germany, it's still. The people and the politics are not rebellious, and that is missing. It is like what you said, football team. That is what in Italy you can be of completely. They had communists and they had very right-wing people. You would go to a football game and cheer for the same thing, although you were very different. And then afterwards you met and drank a glass of wine with a guy. That was
Yeah.
possible in Italy. I consider that a big cultural achievement. That
Oh yeah.
letting other people live. Yeah, and then in a democracy, it is that you have a chance, you vote, and you have to endure the government of the other people. But there's a fair chance. This is what we should strive for. That it is changed, and then I'm on top of it, and I'll show you that I will do it better. Yeah, but that's not. There are so many. Like if you start, it's always. Made a short their videos for Jacques Beau, and they said, I know from history that if a government is weak and bad, they go to these methods. A
Yeah.
strong government that is successful doesn't do that. So that is a proof that our governments are very bad because I didn't think they would be so bad that they do these kind of things. Yeah? But that's where we are. Okay.
I'll say this before we finish up. One of the arguments behind a modern, at least
I
for
hear the sirens, by the way, all the time
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
third time. They just switched off. The one of the arguments for modern monarchy. The reason for the monarchy is the modern role of a monarch would be to defend the rights of the people, the actual Constitution. Because if you look at the elected politicians, particularly like in the American system or in a lot of other systems where these senators spent 30 years, 40 years in Congress or in Parliament, they're career politicians, as they say. The moment they get in, their first thing is they try to take away the rights. Slowly, maybe, but they try to grab more power, more power. All politicians like power. And they erode any constitutional rights. So you have to have something that's outside that system that can defend the constitutional rights, the constitutional order. And obviously, having a separate court system and everything doesn't work because it's just as corruptible, and we see that the presidents are corruptible. They're bought and paid for. They don't represent the people.
Yeah, very true. And I think I thought, when I was at university, I was extremely impressed by Karl Popper, yeah, Open
Mhm.
Society and Its Enemies. And then later on, there's a fault in there. For example, I was impressed because he said we shouldn't strive to look for the best people to govern us. Instead, we should create a system that even if a gangster becomes president, that he can't do so much trouble. To
Yep.
look like from that side, and that is very intelligent. It's a good argument. But what I notice now is that, for example, if you look at ancient China, since 5,000 years, they
Mhm.
have the idea that if you are in power, you have to opt not optimize, but become an and that is Confucianism. And I think it's in a way true that this is what the Western system misses, that it has people this attitude to say, I do this because it's the right thing. I will lose
Right.
this time, but in the end, we will all win with that. Things. If this attitude is not, you're not the smart. You know, that's what I say. The people now who think they can treat Russia the way they are not, that they say, how shall we meet and live together and discuss in 5 years if we
Yeah.
behave like that? These
Yeah.
are people you would never accept in a family. You wouldn't invite them to a family dinner. You would try to stay away from them. But if you, so this idea of smartness, I think that is very, very American, but you have a remedy against that in the United States. If you look at Tucker Carlson, then that is you can see the learning curve that he has. But this we need to get back to the idea that you that if you are let's say some kind of a gentleman or also gentlewoman idea that we look to be honorable persons. And this is more, it has to be also, that means that you're not punished for it, but you get rewarded for it and you get punished for being the smart ass. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't have that. We have the opposite. I think that is one of the main reasons why things go astray. And that's not left right. That is
Oh
not
yeah.
left right.
Something that was embedded in the Russian monarchy, particularly since the times of the empire, but even before that, during the actual monarchy prior to empire. Um, in Orthodoxy, you consider yourself in a good sense, a slave of God. You are the willing slave of God. And the monarch is the first slave of God. So he is the one that's
Mm.
it's a patriarchal society, of course, at that point. But he's entrusted with the people, and he has to answer to God. Once he dies, he answers to God for what the people have done and what he's done for the people. So he is the first servant, basically, is the way you're the first endangered servant, you could say, from the attitude. And everybody else needs to line up in the same way. You're there in front of, you're there as God's servant to the people, and the whole
Mm.
society, which lacks in a lot of, well, in modern society, there's no such concept anymore. In most modern societies, if I'm a politician, I am your I am over you. I've risen above you. You will listen to what I say because I am in this position, not because I'm here to serve the people or do something to the people. I'm here to overlord the people and get rich. Well, I'm at it. There's always the kickbacks.
Mm. So we have kind of a nihilist society. That's especially,
Yeah,
and that is true because there's nothing like that binding thing that what Goethe said, if you go to church on Sunday, it means that you should remember that you're dust. This attitude,
yes,
we need that in yourself that you understand will disappear. Huh?
mhm, yeah. There's no humility. I mean, if you remember it's your dust
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's humility. But when you look at people like Trump, for example, yeah, the fact that Graham just passed away should remind him that he's mortal. But it's that imperial attitude. I am above you. I am the chosen. I'm Saturn. There's no there's just that there's no humility. That's the word for it. There's absolutely no humility.
Yes. Very different. Yeah, I hope tonight I will see Odysseus, and there's this old thing in Troy where they are asked if they want to be forever remembered persons or if they want to live a good life and live a long life and be unimportant. And they chose to be remembered forever. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to be in the Trojan War, but
Yeah.
the attitude. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wish I'd done better choice in actors. But I don't.
The point
I'm
is to
still waiting
be
for the
able
white
to
Shaka
show
Zulu.
that you the point is to show that you're able to learn. If you
Yeah,
haven't changed directions some way, one or another, you're not heading for a compass. Yeah. If you are on your own track, then you there will be curves and there will be
yes,
plot
yes,
points. Okay,
absolutely, absolutely.
it was a
I,
pleasure.
it was a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
I want to thank you very much for joining. I hope to have you back on. Uh, Everybody, thank you for joining. Leave comments. We'll discuss this further online. Thank you.
Yeah. So for the German-Russian friendship and the American
Absolutely.
one.
Oh, but by the way, before
Okay.
we leave, where can people find you? I forgot to ask you this at the beginning. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, I'm the thing that I do right now. I will have soon. I write Substack articles. Until now, I'm in the German-speaking world. I had been on TNT Australia, that
Mhm.
radio program. They're folded. Unfortunately, they don't exist anymore. That was a very interesting station. A lot of different opinions, really. Yeah. But I will be on Substack, but with it's a wide range of topics. Right now, I'm writing about the beginning of international law in 1603.
Oh,
It was created really from an act of piracy, that is Grotius. So, yeah, I studied very broadly so that people ask me, "Can't you make a decision?" I said, "No, I don't want." And so, if you're interested in these kind of things where ideas come from very different parts of the reality that we have, then it will be good. For other people, it will be he's all over the place. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon again.
Anytime.